Hello.
So, wow, we have a full house today. Um, so I guess we'll get started in I think we're just going to get started actually. Let me minimize that. Hopefully everyone can see the opening slide that says leasing retail space, pitfalls and must-haves. Um,
Yes.
that's what everyone should be seeing. I don't know if you see anybody's faces in the corner or little boxes that are open. Hopefully not. I'm just going to keep that stuff open in case someone else shows up. I'll be able to let them in. Although I know Lisa Oak has a strict rule: start on time, end on time. And I have a feeling what that means is if you start, the doors get barred, they get locked up,
Of course
bolts
not.
go across them, and nobody else is allowed in. So I don't want to. I don't know that I want to go to that extreme. So
No.
I'm going to keep this little box down here. I don't know. I'm going to keep it open. But anyway, again, thank you for all being with us today. It's really great to see so many of you take a real hard, serious interest in how you can not only better educate yourself and your system, I think that's key, but really better educate your franchisees and help them and assist them in finding great locations. And more importantly, because finding the location is only sort of the first step. Now you got to do a good deal. I've often told folks, you could have a great location and a crappy lease, or you could have a crappy location and a good lease. Guess what? Neither of those work. You have to have a good location and a good lease. And Lisa is really expert in this, having done this for numerous national brands, most notably Subway. She can really speak to the topic. Again, what we'd like you to do is we're kind of going to start to roll into this. If you wouldn't mind, just put your name and your email address into the chat so we know who's here, and we can communicate that way. So just put your name and your email address in the chat as we go along. Of course, if you have any questions, as I said, what we would prefer is unmute your mic and kind of wait for a space where Lisa and I come up for air, which is difficult for me to do. It'll be more difficult to find that for me, but not so much for Lisa. But when you do, when you see that, please feel free to ask questions along the way, because if we wait to the end, which might be 30 or 40 minutes from now, the question, somebody may not, we got to go back maybe 2 slides or 3 slides and it'll kind of get lost in the sauce. So this is designed to be a dialogue and a forum with information being sent out to you so that that dialogue and that question can be properly fed. So again, thank you. I see we've got a couple of lawyers here. We have three of our friendly competing FSOs. It's glad to know that our competitors come to us for information. I'll have to broadcast that. I love that idea. And a lot of franchisors, and it looks like we've got 2 or 3 or 4 actually franchisees, which is great. So we've got everybody in the pool. So with that, I guess we'll begin. I want to first cover sort of what we'll be talking about today. We've broken it down into 2 sections. One is site selection, and the other is the lease negotiation, and then we'll have a Q&A. Lisa, did you want to add anything to this or to my opening?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me to join you on this webinar and getting to talk about one of my most favorite topics in the world. I didn't know I was a deal junkie. I didn't know anything about lease negotiations until I took that infamous summer job at Subway for $6.75 an hour. And I've been passionate about this subject ever since. So thanks for the invitation, Gary, and I look forward to the dialogue.
Great, great. Thank you. So again, we're going to try to keep this to about a 40-minute, 40-minute dissertation, if you will, and dialogue. We'll have plenty of time at the end for more questions. And then we'll give you, most of you have my contact information because I probably sent everybody 50 million emails with reminders about this. So I know you got my email address. You'll have Lisa's. And certainly if you want to dig deeper into it or talk offline, we're always happy to do that. It's what we do. This is part of what I practice. For those of you who know Seth Godin always talks about the gift economy, where you just put stuff out there, you don't expect to get anything back, other than the reward of sharing the information. And that's part of why I started Franchise Growth Solutions 9 years, almost 10 years ago now. Was really about sharing information and what I had gathered in my little skull over the last 35 years. So the first thing that we'll touch on is site selection, and we've got a few topics here. And David Simmons from Resolute RE is on the call, and I'm glad that he's on because I will probably have a couple of questions for him, and I've used a couple of his slides, so David may be able to answer some questions and speak on the topic. But when we're talking about site selection, we break it down. I break it down, and again, I'm not a real estate person. But the way I look at it and the way we explain it to potential franchisees and franchisors who are our clients, what we do is we tell them that the process really is a sort of a three-phase process in terms of finding the location. One is you need to know the market. And that has nothing to do with the specific location. And we guide our franchisors to look at markets in advance of awarding franchises within those markets. So we might take a market, say New York City or Long Island, a county in Long Island, Nassau County, and then we would ask a company like Resolute RE, David's company, to sort of, hey, you know the brand, how many opportunities in terms of territories or markets would there be? And maybe David comes back and says, well, there's 10, seven of them are great, four of them overlap, so you really only have, six opportunities, whatever it is. So we want the franchisee and the franchisor to understand what the total opportunity or the total number of units that can go into an area, because franchisees will ask, do I get a protected territory? Are you putting units too close to me? How do you do that? So having a tool and having a strategic partnership with a company like David's is very helpful. We also explain to the franchisor and the franchisee what's the role of the local market broker, the person that's actually going to take that person out to look at sites. And we often get franchisees that will say, well, I can do that on my own. Well, okay, maybe you can drive around town and you could look at, for rent signs if that's what you're into. But it doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna get all of the opportunities, because the local market brokers very often, they know what may be coming available in a month or two, what landlord is looking to move a tenant out. So working with a local market broker is a very, very important piece to not only finding better locations, but finding them quicker and getting a lot of background in that. David, can I sort of intrude on you, or impose on you rather, to maybe just talk about the role of a local market broker for a minute or two?
Absolutely. Of course, it could differ slightly or completely in different programs. Our platform is, we always choose local market brokers. I always tell people, if you're coming to Austin, Texas, where I am, I'm your guy. Outside of Austin, I'm always going to go with the local boots on the ground. I rely on them for a few things. One is finding the sites. I help put together the property tours with them. But it's relying on their local market expertise and finding the sites. Now, of course, they're going to be there to open up doors for property tours. But did I mention, find us the sites? And then the master broker, not only is he coordinating everything and sort of like project management, but then he'll take over and, negotiate all the negotiations from there once we zero in on, 1 to 3 to 4 sites.
Mm-hmm. And that's what this site selection market before the local market broker, kind of skipped a slide, my apologies. But this is what we're looking at in market analytics. We're looking at what's our development strategy, as I mentioned, how many units can go into a market, who's the customer persona. Are we dealing with a brand or a product that appeals to, golden age people like myself, or younger people, or people who are affluent, people who are not so affluent, maybe just middle class, people with kids. So all of this assessment is done prior to going out to look at locations. And what the analytics and how this information is bundled is this information is then given to the local market broker and given to the franchisee, so they understand what they're looking for. And that's the first step in that three-step process. The second one, what am I doing? I'm terribly sorry. I'm like really bad at this. Okay. We're gonna have to go all the way back. I think I got little fat fingers on here. Okay. So the second piece to this is understanding how those territories break out in that market analytics. And this is one of David's maps where he looked at two markets for one of our clients. David, this is really old stuff. And we looked at that area where the franchisee was interested in, and this looks like the Dallas Fort Worth market because I see Plano and Garland in there, and the analytics indicated that those were the two markets that the franchisee would want to be in or look at. We also did, or I should say, David did, who are the competitors? In this particular case, it was a pizza concept, so you could see all those little colored dots on there, and then you can see the legend on the other side indicating all of the other pizza joints that were in one of those territories. I think this territory was the Colony. Then it was broken down here by population and age. And then by what's called tapestry segmentation. David, you want to give us a quick 2 minutes on tapestry segmentation, if you don't mind? Well, maybe not. All right, I can give it to you. So rather than simply breaking down groups of people by age and income, the tapestry is broken down more by lifestyle. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner there, which says young and restless, metro renters, home improvement, that sort of stuff. What it shows is it shows the type of lifestyle that individuals live. I don't want to say completely regardless of age and income, but it becomes an additional factor to that. And what the mapping shows is where those segments actually live within that market. And then the goal is to match where you want to put your unit or your franchised unit, your franchisee's unit in an area in that market that most closely matches, call it within a 10-minute drive or a 15-minute drive if it's a suburban market, most closely matches what you see on this map. And in this particular case, a 10-minute drive time in that colony, what we call the colony, that market, this would be the franchisee's territory. So I know a lot of franchisors are still sort of, they're in the Stone Age. I say that playfully, not in a negative way, where they just draw circles, around a location. Well, that doesn't mean anything because if I draw circles around a location that I want to put on 11th Avenue in Manhattan and I give somebody a 2-mile radius, well, that might mean I can't open one in Hoboken, New Jersey, because I'm not cognizant of the fact that there's a river in between. So, of course, that's an extreme example, but this way and doing territories based on road systems and drive time, in our humble opinion, this is the right way to do it. And this is a big piece that you can use to help your franchisees find great sites and help you designate territories that need to be listed in franchise agreements. So the role of the broker, as David said, is to take the demographics and the information, locate leads and find out, where are these locations? What are the comparable market rents so that when they're helping your franchisee create an LOI and negotiate, they understand what's going on in the market. So the broker, as we mentioned earlier, has a very, very important role in this entire site selection process. And then, of course, once you actually are in that negotiation, comes the whole topic of LOIs and lease negotiation and what you should have and what you should avoid and what does the attorney do. And at this particular point, I'm going to ask anyone if they have questions regarding site selection, and if not, we will turn it over to Lisa. So thus far, does anybody have any questions on the overview of site selection and how you can help your franchisee? All right. Well, is someone talking? I don't see anybody talking. I don't hear anyone.
Very
Yeah,
Lena here. I'd like to ask about site selection.
sure.
So with different concepts, like service-based business or QSR and whatnot, is it just based on their experience that franchisor like running their corporate location, they need to evaluate like demographic, like density of the population in the area or foot traffic? Do they need to only copy what they've learned on in their own business, or it's something that objectively they need to evaluate when helping franchisees to open in their respective area?
Fantastic question. The answer is yes and no and maybe. And here's
Thank
what I
you.
mean. And here's what I mean by that. If it's a bricks and mortar, let's say it's a restaurant. I'll use an example. We have a restaurant. One of our clients has 4 locations in Manhattan, and they're in 4 completely different neighborhoods. Okay, one is sort of a nighttime young people neighborhood. Another one is the Upper West Side, which is young married couples with baby carriages, and one on the Upper East Side. Nonetheless, the persona of the guest in that particular restaurant varies. So that particular client uses Resolute, and what David asked for was as much information about those people as they could gather. Well, the best place to get that information in this particular case were all the people who signed up for his loyalty program. So we simply downloaded a list of email addresses and sent that out to David, who was able to match the profiles of those individuals and come up with the persona of the perfect guest for that particular concept. So it varies in every case. The information definitely comes from the franchisor's experience, but it's not sort of one of those questions where if you ask the franchisor, who's your customer, very often the franchisor is going to go, well, everybody's my customer. Everybody loves what we do. The truth is, no, they don't. Not everybody. And, if I'm opening up a location in Great Neck, Long Island, and I've got data that I've derived from a company store that I have in Times Square, I can tell you the occasion to use and the user will be different. So it's case sensitive. It is the true answer to your question, Lena, but it's a great question. Anyone else with a question on site selection? And again, if you have other questions, everyone's name and email is in the chat, so you can just locate David and you can just contact him directly or locate me, and I'll connect you with David. We find the vast majority of our clients use his service, and it's very helpful. And I'll have him tell you about it, but we're not going to do that today. So unless there's any other questions, Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. So one of the things that I've observed as I work with franchisors and franchisees on this aspect of the development pipeline is that there's a lot of focus, understandably, on the numbers in the deal, in the LOI or in the lease. How much is it going to cost? What are the add-ons going to be? What I want to talk about here are not so much the numbers, the words. The words are really important. So if we go to the next slide, talking about avoiding hitting costs, we'll see that this comes up. It comes up in hundreds of ways, but the ones I'll focus on here are when we're calculating the additional rent, particularly CAM, taxes, insurance, common area maintenance. What's it based on? Is it based on how many pro rata share of how many tenants occupy the center or how many spaces there are in the center? That could be a huge difference in your ongoing costs. We want to make sure that the lease includes the tenant's right to audit those costs. What is the total cost of occupancy? And the list really goes on and on. But here is just a sampling of aspects that could get you later if you don't anticipate them up front and negotiate the causes for protection. It can get to you later. What do some components like free rent or tenant improvement allowances look like over the length of the lease? All good news up front, but what's it going to cost you over the long haul, and how does that work into the rent? Becomes particularly important when we start to talk about the term. How long is the term? How many options do you have? What are the costs associated with exercising those options? Always, you can click, Gary. Always, always, always need to have an attorney involved in your lease negotiations. And I don't mean, the attorney your brother-in-law used for his divorce. I mean an experienced commercial real estate attorney, preferably one with franchising experience. Leasing in the franchise arena is different than franchising other commercial real estate deals. What are the franchisors' requirements? What are the franchisors' rights? What does the franchisee have to watch out for? What rules does he have to comply with before signing that lease? A commercial real estate attorney with experience in franchising is really critical and really helpful here. I'm going to pause right there in case there's commentary from the many attorneys we have on the call.
Any one of the attorneys care to make a comment on that? Otherwise, Lisa, I have a kind of a question comment.
Oh, Lisa or Gary, would you be okay with me making a recommendation for? I've got a commercial real estate attorney that does nothing but franchise leases, tenant side leases. Would you be okay with me dropping his contact info?
Yeah, just put it in the chat, Drew, and it's good to hear you, and I hope I see you in a couple of weeks over at IFA.
You
Hi,
absolutely
Drew.
will, sir. Hi, Lisa. Good to hear from you.
Good to see you.
One of the things I know that we don't really struggle with it because we have our franchisors prepped pretty well. They very often the franchisor doesn't really understand what's in their franchise agreement and what rights and remedies they have. And one of the things that we tell franchisors, because franchisors run the risk if they get too close to the lease negotiation or deciding on the space, they can be accused of not really an earnings claim, but if the space doesn't work out or if the business doesn't work out, the franchisee can come back and go, well, you said this was a good spot, or you said I was going to make money, or whatever. So the challenge, the dilemma that franchisors are faced with is they need to be close enough to keep the franchisee sort of on the right path, but far enough away to be accused of doing anything that could be misconstrued later on. And as I mentioned, a lot of franchisors don't really understand what's in their agreement. And an example, and I face this all the time, is many franchisors don't understand the collateral lease assignment. They don't even know it's an exhibit in their franchise agreement in many cases. We have to point it out to them. And while Lisa can give you detail on this, I will tell you that fortunately I had that in a franchise agreement, in all of our franchise agreements when I was a franchisor, because we had to take back a store once, which in 35 years, I've only had to do it once, where we actually had to go in and take back a store. And we had to exercise our right with the landlord that, hey, there's a conditional lease assignment. You have to put us back on this lease. And of course, the landlord complied. So, it's things like that. Lisa, I'll let you detail that up a little bit, or if there are other little pieces like that where an attorney can really be helpful in making sure that those pieces are actually in the lease.
Thanks, Gary. I think the collateral assignment, the right to the franchisor stepping into the tenant's shoes on the lease, is one of several examples where consistency is critical from a franchisor's point of view. It's not easy to get a landlord to agree to sign off on that document. It's not as hard as it was, decades ago. But franchising is still, its own subset in commercial real estate. And if a landlord isn't familiar with leasing to franchisees, it might be met with significant resistance. But consistency is critical. If this is part of your franchise offering, and in most cases it is today, You absolutely have to have it in every deal. You can't hoodwink it away because down the road, franchisors and franchisees will regret not having that part of their documentation. So Gary pointed out the first and most obvious use of this right, this document, is if there's a franchisee or a tenant default on the lease, the franchisor has the right to step in and put another franchisee in there to save a good location. Has the right, but not the obligation.
Mhm.
So that can save the business. It can also help the franchisee transfer to a new franchisee or a buyer of that business.
Yep.
A less obvious benefit to that document is if the franchisor down the road decides to exit the business, sell the franchise organization. Part of what will be examined in due diligence in that sale are the documents, this being one of them. What are the franchisor's rights? And having those rights help the potential buyer's assessment of value of that franchise organization. If every single deal has the collateral assignment included, every single deal, it's easier to have it. It's not negotiable. And we're going to talk about other must-have components of your leases, but this is certainly one of them. All franchisees must be treated consistently and
Yep.
equally.
Yep.
So it needs to be in every single deal if it's part of your franchise offering.
Yep. And before we
Yeah.
go to the next slide, Lisa, I just want to add, because you mentioned about exit. I can
Mhm.
tell you, having been on the buy side at private equity, buying franchise companies and looking at franchise companies, what we what we were concerned with, at sort of in the top three or four things of what we were concerned with, one was the consistency and making of documentation, making sure the franchisor had all the proper documentation, meaning copies of franchisees' leases, insurance, and making sure that the leases were favorable to the franchisor, using this as an example. So not only is this a necessary component to help your franchisee as they're going along and to help you, if something goes south, but it's also a necessary component at the sales side, at the exit side, if that's the case, if that's the goal, because again, I can tell you, being on the buy side, my job was to find every little thing that was wrong or missing to devalue the company so that we paid less for it. Your job as a franchisor is to make sure you have everything buttoned up to increase the selling value of the company. So this may seem like something minor, but at the back end, it could be a quarter of a point on a multiple, which if you're got a $8 or $10 million EBITDA line, a quarter of a point is real money. So just keep everything in perspective, that these things, while they may seem, I don't want to trouble the franchisee or the landlord doesn't want to give it, these things can negatively impact you later on.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And buy-side due diligence is one of the many similarities Gary and I have on our resume. Um, I'm here to tell you that when you're at your size, whatever it is, it's much easier to put these systems in place now that it will be when you're at hundreds or thousands of locations in the future. So you want to set it up for that consistency in the beginning, even though it seems really hard to get these components in your leases at this time. You'll thank me later. Trust me.
Okay. So I'm trying I want to switch the slide without like going 5 slides over. Okay, I did it.
We're going to talk about some, not all, must-have clauses. And we already talked about one of the major contingencies, and that is franchisor approval. What are the requirements in your franchise agreements that franchisees have to comply with to get approval? One of them may be the conditional assignment document. Another may be, well, lots of things, use clauses or certain signage and what have you. You need to know what's in there and make sure, as you're negotiating your leases, those contingencies are there for franchisor approval of your lease before or after the franchisee signs the lease. Another is permits. Signage is critical for brand awareness. Do you have a contingency in the lease, not only for the municipality's approval of your signage, and for the landlord's approval of your signage and the franchisor's approval of signage? So those are just a few examples of what you want to have for contingencies. What's the competitive landscape? We looked at a map David and Gary created about pizza. If you're in a strip center, if you have a pizza concept, do you want another pizza concept in your strip center? What does the lease say about your protection against competitive neighbors? And what is the definition of competitive? Is it certain percentage of sales of a restaurant in pizza? Maybe, then that might be okay. Is it absolutely no pizza in the center? Is it absolutely no food in the center? What's the definition for your brand of competition, and how far do you want to go? Think about a food court filled with concepts, QSR concepts that I could argue are competitive. But doesn't that competition draw more customers to the food court to increase your customer base? So you want to be careful that this could cut both ways. You need to examine the needs of your concept. You need to examine the needs of the category your concept is in, and the location needs. The market. Yep. Old story. Burger King selected sites across the street from McDonald's, and I've worked with concepts that have done use similar strategies in site selection for whom it's worked really well. So you want to be clear about what your needs are and what the restrictions are, and be clear that the lease reflects what that is. Flip side, you're in a strip center, and it's often desirable to be an early tenant in a new construction strip center. But what if the landlord doesn't do a good job leasing the empty spaces? What does that do to the traffic and the energy in the center? One of the things that we use to evaluate location value is how much traffic there is in the center. Well, if there are 10 spaces and only 6 are filled, how's that working for you? So do you want to have a clause in your lease that says your rent is adjusted downward if the occupancy level goes over a certain amount, a certain percentage? Food for thought. One of my favorites is, what is the length of term in your lease? What is the initial term? And what are your options? First to consider is the term of your franchise agreement. You want to have the right to be in that space for the length of your franchise agreement. Say your franchise agreement's 10 years. Does the lease give you the right to be there for the entire 10 years? Notice I've been emphatically using the word right. If you break that up, the same 10 years, break it up into an initial term with options that get you to 10 years, you have the right, but not the obligation. Let's dive into that a little more. What is an option? So with my 10-year example, maybe your initial term is 5 years with one 5-year option. Got to make sure that the rent is specified for that 5-year option. If it's not a specified rent, it's not an option. It's a right to talk about it. So you really don't have 10 years. You only have 5 years. So you have to have a way that the lease specifies what the rent is during the option period. Is 10 years enough? Well, maybe if it comports with your franchise agreement, but ideally you want to have as many options as possible. Again, the right, not the obligation. So you want to ask for 20 years, let's say, in as short of incremental terms as possible. Now, remember, in lease negotiations, this slide's talking about must-have clauses. But right here, we have must-have clauses and nice-to-have clauses. I say a must-have clause is the right to be there for the duration of the franchise agreement. But the opportunity to be there for an additional 10 years is nice to have. When you look at how the rent is calculated for the terms after the initial term, could be a fixed percentage rent. The rent's going to increase each option term by X or each year by Y, or a schedule that absolutely specifies what the dollar amount is. That's all fine. But what happens if the fair market value in the market declines during those 20 years? And your lease says that your rent during...
Hello, good morning. How are you? Appreciate it. Thanks.
Drew, you're not on mute. As you look at your rent in year 15, say, it may exceed what the market value is. It's okay. That's an opportunity to renegotiate. But at least it's a cap on how high your rent could be. So let it go the other way. Let's say the market rent has increased dramatically more than anybody anticipated at the outset. Well, now you have a cap and you can exercise that. So options are literally that. It gives you the option to evaluate the marketplace, evaluate whether or not you want to relocate. Obviously goes to how you're going to address that. And I just got a time signal from Gary, so I have to move along. But I love this topic.
Yeah. Well, again, folks, you can reach out. A lot of this stuff has a lot more details than we're able to present in 40 minutes. So that you can just reach out to Lisa for more details on this stuff, because it is important. And I certainly don't want to rush any of the information. But on the other hand, I know we're busy. So
Yes.
that's why.
And I was getting long on options, so thank you for that, Gary. Exit strategies. Nobody likes to talk about it at the outset of a new deal. Just like nobody wants to talk about a prenuptial agreement when they're engaged to be married. But you gotta. My favorite example is you're attracted to this location because of a high school down the street, drawing traffic, energy, etc. As time goes on, the high school closes. What do you do? What clauses do you have in the lease that you thought about in the front end, never anticipated COVID? You can exercise when that what if happens later. It could be a kick out clause. You're going to pay a certain amount of money to get out early. It could be based on sales to give you the right of a kick out clause. It could be a good guy clause saying what condition you're required to put the property in if you do exit early, or actually exit anytime, etc. Okay, Gary, you wanna click?
Did I miss one here? No. Okay.
No.
Yeah. Okay. So we're definitely going to take questions on that last point that Lisa made. One of the things I want to talk about, again, another personal, when you run into a brick wall and you get a bloody nose, you learn not to run into brick walls. So a personal experience, we had a lease out in Massapequa, Long Island. And what I didn't realize was in the lease, in our good guy clause, because it sounded like, hey, we got a good guy clause, right? What I didn't realize was when we left, we had to take a restaurant and turn it back into a dry space, including removing the venting and sealing up the roof, as well as reimbursing the landlord for the balance of the amortized commission that he paid the broker. So It cost us almost as much money to get out as if we had stayed there for another 6 or 7 months. So those are just some of the things that people go, "What? Yeah, yeah, for real." We didn't see it, we didn't understand it. Our attorney may have seen it and may have thought we understood it, and we probably had the wrong attorney on that deal because I would have hoped that we would have gotten counsel. But look, this is a really important topic, as I mentioned. I mean, if you're in a bricks and mortar franchise business, your goal really is to get your franchisees in the best possible locations, to do it as quickly as possible so that you start collecting royalties, to make sure those spaces are going to put the franchisee in the best profit position long term due to rent. You want to make sure that it's going to keep the investment, the turnkey investment low. Remember, if you've got a lot of franchisees opening up in spaces that are inconsistent with your item seven, you're going to have to up your item seven. And if that number gets too high, that's going to impede franchise sales. So, because it may not indicate at the very least a 2-to-1 sales to investment ratio, item seven versus item 19. So again, all of these things, everything touches everything else. There's nothing here in a vacuum. If you want more information on the site selection piece, I'll be happy to connect you with David on the leasing piece. Lisa can help you. I think Drew said he put an attorney in the chat. But at this point, we'd love to open it up for some questions. And I think some folks actually emailed me in advance of this. Lisa, they emailed me some questions, but I'd rather leave it open for the people who actually made the time to attend. So why don't you hit us with some questions, folks?
Actually, real quick, Gary, I want to tie back to the good guy clause in site selection. I love going into sites after someone else exercised the good guy clause. Now I have the bathrooms, I have the tile floor, et cetera. So that cost to build comes way down. So those are really great sites to look at.
Yep, and I think Fred Curvan is on the call with Curvan Consulting, and we work together, and he's more on the ops side and on the build out side. And one of the things is we're really immersed in, I mean, what we're known for. I guess I'm going to humbly brag. We're the leaders in the restaurant space, in the franchise space. So we always are looking for second generation restaurant space. That's what you're referring to, Lisa. The
Absolutely.
challenge, the challenge there is that sometimes second gen restaurant space, if the franchisor is really hell bent on how the location has to be laid out and look, sometimes second gen space can actually cost more because
Sure.
you might have a big demolition bill from your GC before you to take it down to sort of the walls before you can actually start to build. So that's sort of a double-edged sword. In most cases, second gen space is better from a build out cost point of view, but not always. Nothing is ever absolute.
Nope. Case by case in all cases.
Yep. 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 So, folks, what other questions that you might have on site selection or lease negotiation that we can help you out with today? Guess we did a great job here, Lisa. So
Love it.
I will tell you, one of the questions I want to just open up that I just want to open up that email. Okay, so one of the questions that someone asked, and I think it's a very relevant question, and that is where should the bulk of the negotiation be done? And I'm going to give you my sort of franchisor's consultant's point of view. Lisa, you might have a different point of view. David, you might have a different point of view. But I never want to negotiate the lease through attorneys. Um, because once you involve the attorneys, the meter is running and you're running up legal fees if you're not on a flat rate to negotiate a lease. So, what do I mean by that? I mean, I like to negotiate the main terms, as Lisa mentioned. What's the length of the lease? What are the options? What's the true cost of occupancy with CAM charges? What are the exclusionary clauses? What is the signage going to look like? Am I allowed to put up logoed signage, which the franchisor wants me to have? I like to negotiate all of those things up front in an LOI because I can go back and forth from broker to broker 10 times if I want, and it's not costing me any money. But the minute the landlord pulls a lease, and now I'm negotiating finer points in a lease, well, now they're paying their attorney, I'm paying my attorney, and the more that you leave left open to negotiation at the point when a lease is pulled, I will tell you 100% of the time, unless you have in-house counsel, 100% of the time, it is going to cost you more money to do that lease than if you had negotiated those main points through an LOI. Lisa, I'd love to hear your opinion on that. David, I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, sure. And I agree with you completely. And at the top of the call, Gary, you talked about education, and that's one of the reasons I'm here. I think the more franchisors become knowledgeable on this subject, what's desirable in leases, what they require in their leases, they can support their franchisees to do this work up front. The examples that Gary gave, I really think are business components of the lease, not so much legal components of the lease. And you want to watch out for those. You want to get those clauses in up front and then have your attorney look at what could they do to you on a default? Where are we going to, are we going, or did we just agree to Anchorage as a jurisdiction? What's it going to cost me? Right? What are the legal implications of this lease? But the business aspect should be done up front with attorneys taking a look at that draft before the leases are actually signed. I have a note here from Harold with a reminder that as we were talking about collateral assignment, we want to make sure that the lease has a sublet clause to give the tenant, the franchisee, the right to sublet to another franchisee without the landlord's consent. The language that I used in subway leases was a bona fide franchisee, a bona fide subway franchisee. So if the franchisor approves it, that's all we need to know. And the landlord does not have the right to further consent. Harold, if I didn't hear your point, please speak up. Drew is asking about how much the franchisor should assist. And that was going to my last comment. I think it's all about education. It's all about, just working with franchisees in the development phases and supporting them, back to Gary's point, not taking on the responsibility, but supporting franchisees to get the best possible deal. And yes, I do create standard documentation to offer landlords, whether it's an LOI or a lease. At Subway, we only got landlords to agree to use the standard Subway lease 25% of the time. Let me say that again. We got landlords to agree to the standard Subway lease 25% of the time. If we didn't put out a standard lease, that would have been another 25% that we were on a landlord's form. And guess what? We got a better deal when it was on our form because, you're negotiating against yourself. And always better to start with your own form. Drew, if I didn't hear your point, please speak up.
Okay.
Lisa, on the sublease, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, Harold, we can. Thank you.
On the sublease, back in the day when I was working at Sbarro, they only went into malls back in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
And they took the lease and they did the build out and they sold the location to the franchisee.
Mm-hmm.
Every lease that they signed had to have the same sublet clause only for the franchisor to be able to sublet it to a franchisee without the landlord's consent. And that had to be in if the landlord refused, we wouldn't do the deal.
And same at Subway, Harold. And when I was negotiating leases for Subway, remember that summer job I talked about? It was the late 80s. Landlords weren't used to dealing with franchises. The right to approve assignees or sublessees was just not something they were willing to give up. Now, many landlords are much more familiar with dealing with franchises and more familiarity as franchising has grown and brands have grown. So it's easier now, but I couldn't agree to a lease that didn't have that. I signed the leases on behalf of Subway Real Estate Corp and then used a pass-through sublease to the franchisees, retaining the right to substitute the franchisee later. So that was the system we had in lieu of what is more common today, the collateral assignment that we talked about earlier. And I focused on that because it is more popular now. But thanks
I'm
for
sorry.
drawing that distinction, Harold.
One of the things I want to add to this is all of this is, what the franchisor wants. And sometimes, again, from a franchisor's point of view, as a franchisor, in addition to all the other things that I mentioned, a big piece of this is managing the expectations and the feelings of the franchisee. Not every franchisee is going to be all buttoned up about business and emotionless, which is where I think they need to be when they're looking at a site. Anyone that falls in love with a site is trouble, as far as I'm concerned, because all of a sudden they're not thinking with a data-driven mindset. Okay. So the reason I say that's important is because you might come back to a franchisee and say, well, the landlord won't do this, or we did the demographics and it's X. Now, what happens is you would think the franchisee would embrace the idea and embrace the information and say, "Oh, Mr. Franchisor, thank you so much for saving me from getting into a bad deal or getting into a bad location." But what you usually hear, not usually, that's a wrong word. What you may hear is, "Oh, I think you're wrong. This is where my wife gets her nails done every week. It's always busy in this shopping center. You can never find a place to park. By the way, if you can never find a place to park, that could be a problem." Okay. So as a franchisor, you have to manage the feelings and the expectations of the franchisee, because in this case, and I always hate to use the term the franchisor knows best, but in this case, the franchisor may know best. And it's your job to keep them out of trouble, but not, get them all bent out of shape and angry and aggravated. And I would have opened 6 months ago, but you haven't approved any of the sites, and on and on and on. So just sort of keep that in mind, that there's a balance. I don't know if if any of the franchisors on the call want to add anything to that. But I always found that to be challenging with franchisees that fall in love with locations as opposed to looking at the data behind the location.
Gary,
Gary, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Harold.
did you see my earlier question regarding mapping and the softwares that are out there that do the mapping? Do you recommend that or not?
I'm gonna put that question over to David Simmons if he's still on the call, because I am a huge believer in that. Because if I really want to be data driven in the decision, then I need data, and I need good data. And when I look at the mapping tools that, say, like Resolute RE uses, I don't know the software. It may be Placer AI. I always describe it as creepy. And why do I say it's creepy? Is because I don't want people knowing that much about, like, my shopping habits and my eating habits, because I just don't. Whereas a guy like David and the people who want to find the locations, they love that information. David, are you still on the webinar?
I am, sir.
Okay, great. Anything you want to speak to about the software? Because I know you guys spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on software. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about it.
Yeah. So, we have a sort of philosophy: you lead with the analytics, you close with the real estate. The tools that we have these days to be able to help our clients, find the right areas, are simply amazing. We're talking about information that gets updated daily, which is just, that's within the past year that's become possible. And that's with geofencing, which is, every one of our cell phones are beacons. And you can't shut that part off. You can't, even if you power it down, they're still going to be tracking you. And, the only way you can do it is, like in a high action thriller movie where you take off the back of your phone and you throw it out the car window. That's the only way to get them to stop tracking you. But what that does for us is identifies traffic patterns. So if you're looking at an area, a shopping center, a space, we can tell you where all the traffic is coming from, and then where it's going to afterwards. We could tell you the roads most traveled to get there, to cut off that traffic, maybe to a competitor. They're also logging us as far as, where we're going and how long we're staying there. So my favorite story is we had a pizza client come to us brand new 7 months ago, 4 units. One of the units was doing terribly, didn't make sense. It checked all the boxes the other 3 did. So we ran the study, and what we found out was, and it's a sit-down concept, is that with this tool, we were able to determine that on average, their customers at this fourth location were staying 35 minutes less than the other three locations, and they weren't returning. So that told us it wasn't a real estate problem, cannibalization market. No, it was management. It was ops. And so the big boss man went in there, cleared house, put in a new management team, and now the unit does just as well, if not better, than the other three. We didn't make any money off of that, but we were able to help our client, from making a big mistake of closing down a unit that shouldn't have been closed down. So, it's almost like telling a blind person what the color blue looks like, when trying to explain all this stuff. But I put in my I'm putting in my email address again. Email me. I'll shoot you our package on our analytics program, and we're happy to go over with you subsequently, over a 20-minute Zoom call.
Yep. And what I want to add to what David just said, again, from a franchisor's point of view, I'm a really big believer in connecting the dots, and people always talk about let's connect the dots. What I've learned is first you have to collect the dots. So obviously all these little bits and pieces that we're talking about are the dots and how they connect. In listening to David just then, just kind of popped in my head again. You want franchisees to get locations faster, so you collect royalties at a lower cost, better locations. And what does that mean? In this story that David just told, that franchise location performing better now increases the AUV that you get to report in your item 19 in your FDD. So people go, wow, look at how much money these stores make on average. So again, everything touches everything else. Nothing here is in a vacuum. Selling franchises is not only a complicated process, but it's also a serious process, because at the end of the day, what I always keep in mind, and it's quite honestly, it's what pisses me off about some people who sell franchises, is they don't really understand that franchise buyer, if they're not a big company or a seasoned player, that person may be putting a second mortgage on their house, or they may be quitting their job to do this. And you haven't done everything you could possibly do to set them up for success. Not only do I think that's immoral, I think ultimately it leads to failure on the franchisor side, which ultimately leads to the failure of those selling the franchise. In some cases, it's an FSO, it could be a broker, it could be the franchisor himself. So enough about that. Any other questions in the chat? Any other questions that folks have? I just want to be cognizant. It's noon. We allocated an hour. We're happy to stay on the call. But if there are no other questions, you have my contact, you have Lisa's, you have David's. We can adjourn the call and everyone can get back to work. But again, we're open and we're here. Does anyone have any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right, sold. Well, again, I want to thank everyone for being with us today. It looks like we had a full house. I don't have an exact count, but my screen that shows all the names kind of ran out of room. So I know there's I know there's a lot of people here. Again, we will be doing another webinar, I believe, in about 6 weeks. This one, for those of you who are in the restaurant business, Fred and I will be doing one on controlling cost of goods, primarily food costs. We'll be talking about everything from theoretical food costs to actual food costs to supply chain to how you lay out your restaurant to maximize efficiencies and how you engineer your menu to reduce waste and increase all of the pluses that you can get by having higher drop sizes and a smaller order guide. But we'll leave that for the next one in about 6-7 weeks. Again, everyone, thank you so much for being with us. I truly, truly appreciate it. I look forward to seeing those of you who will be at IFA in, I guess, 2 weeks and on our next webinar. So thank you very much. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Have a good one.